Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Neera, Tanden, the president of the Center for American Progress, and we are extremely fortunate to have the Small Business Administration's new leader, Maria Contreras-Sweet, with us today to discuss her vision for entrepreneurship in America. Administrator Contreras-Sweet was already a successful entrepreneur, executive, and state cabinet official when she was sworn in as administrator for the SBA in April. She knows firsthand the important role small businesses play in creating pathways to the middle class. In 2006, the administrator founded the first Latino-formed commercial bank in California in more than 35 years. And as the bank's executive chairwoman, she provided vital access to capital for small and middle-sized businesses throughout Los Angeles. She also founded a venture capital firm that invested in small businesses. So she is uniquely qualified to identify and address the needs of entrepreneurs, greater access to capital, improve cooperation between business and government, sensible immigration policies, and we talked a lot about how immigration policies will help ensure that our economy is growing, and a well-educated, highly trained workforce that can compete in the global economy. The Center for American Progress has always been dedicated to promoting policies that foster a middle-out economy, and encouraging entrepreneurship is a cornerstone of that agenda. Entrepreneurs have the power to reinvigorate the economy, providing a source of innovation and new ideas. New firms are vehicles for upward mobility and middle-class expansion. One thing we are concerned about is that with rising costs and stagnant wages, there's more of a squeeze on the middle class. And in an environment like that, are people willing to take the risks of entrepreneurship? And that's why the SBA role, among so many reasons, is so vital to our economic growth. And we are thrilled that the administrator will be here addressing her new policies and ideas to encourage entrepreneurship, including expanding access to capital for underserved communities and for women and minority-owned businesses. Immigrant-owned businesses, for example, employ 1 in 10 Americans who work for privately owned companies. So ensuring that they have the tools to start successful businesses is vital to our economy and economic growth. The administrator is herself one of the great American success stories. She was born in Mexico and came to America when she was 5 years old. And her work as an entrepreneur is really all about helping others succeed. Secretary of Business, Transportation, and Housing in the agency in California, she was also the first Latina to hold a state cabinet post there. I'm so pleased Administrator Contreras-Sweet could join us today to discuss how America's small businesses can make a middle-out economy a reality, and how we can do more to create an environment where all American entrepreneurs have the opportunity to succeed. Thank you, and I'm welcome the administrator up to the podium.
Thank you for that very gracious introduction and generous invitation to be here with you today. You know, I always like to start with acknowledging my manners, and that is that you all know me as Maria Contreras-Sweet, and it's my husband who says he made me sweet. And he happens to be here today, actually, so it's nice to have him here. Thank you for supporting me forever. Whenever we have any sign of affirmation, it's always nice to share it with those who made it all possible. But thank you again, Neera, for that kind introduction, and to the entire team that's received us so generously this morning. We're having a great time, and I really enjoyed our conversation. I recently received a call that would change my life and move my husband and me across the country. 2 months ago, President Obama tasked me with 3 objectives: to run an effective SBA, to serve as a voice for America's small business, and to take the SBA to the next level. I embrace this exciting and worthy mission, knowing that small businesses are the backbone of our economy. Small firms make up 99.7% of American employers that generate 2 out of 3 net new private sector jobs and account for half of our private sector employment. The future of our country is truly in the hands of the American entrepreneur. SBA's programs are infusing dollars into local markets and improving the domestic economy. Entrepreneurs inject capital into the economy more quickly as they cover payroll, buy equipment, and acquire real estate. Not only is SBA-backed capital more likely to be spent at home than abroad, but it's also circulated faster in local communities, spurring economic activity. With this in mind, I'm eager for the opportunity to be leading the SBA. You see, many of you know I immigrated to this country from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, at the age of 5, not speaking a word of English. My mother worked at a poultry processing plant, so her 6 children could have opportunities she would never have. My life's journey has been one of seizing opportunities to provide for my family and build my community. From grade school monitor to corporate executive to California Cabinet Secretary to bank founder, and now imagine a member of the President's Cabinet. After all, it's not the titles that we have, however, it's what we do with the titles we have. I'm living my American dream. Now I want every entrepreneur to live theirs. I joined the administration because President Obama is committed to providing equal opportunity and creating new pathways to the middle class. I know how committed he is to creating opportunities for the small business owners. He's demonstrated that over and over by cutting their taxes 18 times. He's created billions of dollars in tax credits, write-offs, and deductions for those who start businesses or they're buying equipment and machinery and investing in startups. He's made quality, affordable health insurance available to small business owners and their employees. Under this administration, SBA eliminated pages and pages that were clogging the capital pipeline and causing more problems than they were solving. We zeroed out fees on loans under $150,000, which has led to a 15% increase in our small dollar lending. In my first 2 months on the job, I've met with field offices, our program leaders, our stakeholders in Congress, the business community, our resource partners, all to strengthen our relationships and enhance our programs. Their insights and their contributions have been invaluable to me, and we've already begun to act on their suggestions. In my first month, we removed 3 critical obstacles to our real estate and financing mechanism. We launched a new national call center for certified development companies to expedite the very important 504 real estate loans. Today, all of the jobs lost in the Great Recession have been recovered, yet our nation still faces a profound challenge. Capital is not reaching small business owners equitably. The face of entrepreneurship is changing in America. More of those faces today belong to women. They belong to Latinos, to African Americans, to Asian Americans, Native Americans, veterans, our seniors, and business owners who are socially and economically disadvantaged. Too many in these groups cannot access the requisite capital to expand. Neither your gender, your race, your age, nor your neighborhood should ever impact whether you get a small business loan. Only your credit worthiness should. So no more excuses. At the SBA, we will assure a continuum of support, especially for our underserved communities. We'll expand access to our core programs we refer to as the 3 C's and a D. That's capital, consultation, contracting, and it goes without saying we'll remain focused on our D, our disaster assistance programs, so that homeowners and business owners can access our help when they need us the most. To advance our work on behalf of America's entrepreneurs, I'm focusing my initial efforts in 3 areas. First, we will modernize and implement smart systems so the SBA can keep pace with technological advances that are changing the way we do banking and conduct business. To encourage our lending partners to provide more capital to Main Street, we will announce our credit analysis using predictive systems. Second, we will create a more inclusive SBA by tailoring programs that embrace our nation's dynamic demographics. Third, we will serve as a market maker for small companies by opening new business channels within the federal government, the corporate supply chain, and international commerce. We will be modern, we will be inclusive, and we will make new markets. This is how we'll move the dial for entrepreneurs from all walks of life. Let's explore these points more fully. First, we're going to modernize our capital access programs to the new ways Americans are accessing financial services, and technology will be the key. The prevailing challenge that we face has been that our loan documentation is too complex and labor-intensive, forcing banks to hire specialized staff or contract it out or walk away from the loan. We just can't afford to lose these partners and turn job creators away. The time has come for us to reach out to all our lending partners on small loans and bring new lenders into the SBA fold. To augment loan volume and multiply points of sale, I'm pleased to announce today that we're transforming into a smart system guarantee process to serve businesses better. Our Office of Capital Access has been testing and refining a predictive business credit scoring model for more than a decade, combining an entrepreneur's personal and business credit scores. SBA's total credit score will make it easier and less time-intensive for banks to do business with us at the SBA. This model is cost-reducing and credit-based. It ensures that the risk characteristics, not socioeconomic factors, are used to determine who is credit-worthy. We're so confident in our model's predictive value on small loans that we're eliminating cumbersome and impeding analyses of a company's cash flow, their EBITDA, a step that can delay loan decisions. So effective next month, I'm directing the SBA total credit scoring model that it be made available to all our lending partners for loans of $350,000 or less. We're making these changes knowing it will simplify, streamline the lending process, and get more loans into the hands of entrepreneurs, especially the underserved. We have another transformative initiative in the works. We call it the SBA One. It's a new, interactive, user-friendly SBA lending platform. Say goodbye to fax machines and mountains of paperwork. We're going to automate the uploading of documents and the generation of forms, and we will allow electronic signatures. On each 7A loan, our core product, the SBA One will save banks hours of processing time and thousands of dollars. The combination of these, of the credit scoring model and the SBA One, will incent more banks to partner with us, generating more loans and igniting economic activity. By making the process quicker, cheaper, and more intuitive, these reforms will help existing lenders do more small dollar lending. These capital access improvements lead into my second priority area, tailoring our programs so the SBA's efforts are responsive to the diversity of this great nation. On an encouraging note, by the way, our lending to African Americans is up 29% over last year. That's important because the Urban Institute found that women and minorities are three to five times more likely to be approved for an SBA-backed loan than a traditional loan. 4 out of 5 loan applications we receive from Hispanic Americans and African American business owners are for $150,000 or less. These small dollar loans, then, are a vital part of our promise of equal opportunity in America. If a bank can't say yes to a borrower, we're asking them to partner with a microlender or a community advantage lender that can. Microlenders and CDFIs are providing specialized technical assistance to underserved borrowers. They can spend time with small business owners to make their credit applications stronger. By facilitating partnerships within the lending space, the SBA can build an expanded capital pipeline. A successful microloan can be refinanced into a community advantage loan, which can be refinanced into a low-interest bank loan, helping borrowers build their credit. This is one way we can build a strong pathway to the middle class. We also have a special obligation to serve those who served us so well. They fought for our freedoms, and now many of our veterans are ready to fight for their freedom, their dream of starting a business. Our armed forces have a track record of producing outstanding leaders. Veterans own 2.5 million businesses that generate more than $1 trillion in sales a year. This year, the SBA will counsel and train 15,000 transitioning service members through our Boots to Business program. This Boots to Business program, we are helping them apply their military discipline and training to their dream of starting a business. America spends, listen to this, America spends an average of $31,000 per service member to get them battle ready, while this program costs an average of $411 per veteran to get them business ready. This program has been so popular with our troops and so cost effective that today we're announcing its expansion. We're calling it Boots to Business Reboot. Starting this summer, in 12 cities across America, we're opening this program to 23 million veterans who have already made the transition to civilian life. Our first class will kick off at the White House on July 11th. While our veterans represent an important group for the SBA, the fact is we offer counseling for all entrepreneurs at every stage of the small business life cycle. We help small businesses start up and scale up. We provide access to new markets so that they can really take off. Last month at Twitter headquarters in San Francisco, I announced a competition to fund 50 local entities that specialize in helping to launch new startups. We're exporting the Silicon Valley model to Middle America to fund business incubators and growth accelerators in underserved communities. But we're equally committed to helping small businesses that are already turning a profit but haven't made it to the next level. 92% of new jobs come from the expansion of small businesses. So today, I'm announcing Scale Up America. We're bringing our successful entrepreneurship education program to up to 14 underserved communities across the country that'll benefit from the intensive SBA support. We'll help firms gain market intelligence. We'll provide counseling for businesses. We'll offer matchmaking with corporate and government buyers. The list of Scale Up communities that we'll select will be announced later this year. Also, as part of our continuum of capital, the SBA is working to disperse investment capital more equitably. Last year, about 1/4 of the companies capitalized by our small business investment companies were owned by minorities, women, or veterans, or those who conduct their business in rural or distressed urban areas. We're focused on increasing these numbers through sustained outreach and through our impact investing initiative. But promoting inclusion is not just about gender, race, and socioeconomics. One of the biggest demographic shifts affecting small businesses has to do with the fact that we're all living longer. So the global population of those 65 and over is expected to triple by mid-century. More and more of our retiring baby boomers are starting a second act and finding fulfillment in entrepreneurship. Americans aged 55 to 64 are creating nearly 1/4 of our new businesses. With their life's experiences in their toolbox, they're actually building businesses in larger numbers than their youthful counterparts. While there is evidence that our Encore program, our existing Encore counseling program for the 50-plus group, continues to be well received, considering the magnitude of this potential impact, a thoughtful examination is warranted about the program's expansion potential so that we might enrich their golden years. Finally, third, the SBA will be a market maker by opening up new areas of business opportunity for small companies. We'll be adaptive to signals in the domestic and the global markets. We will create the conditions for entrepreneurs to secure government contracts, enter the corporate supply chains, and export their products globally. The United States government is the largest procurer of goods and services in the world. The SBA works to level the playing field so the federal government can meet its 23% small business contracting goal. Federal contracts are the oxygen that helps smaller firms hire and grow, supporting 450,000 jobs a year. And increasingly, these businesses are owned by women. Women-owned businesses have grown by a remarkable 20% in just 5 years. More than a quarter of our small businesses are now owned or led by women. Currently, women entrepreneurs are considered underrepresented in only 83 of the 260 industry categories, limiting their ability to receive the federal set-asides they're warranted. We believe the explosive growth of minority-owned businesses will show that many additional industries should be added. So I've instructed my staff to conduct a formal study required for the SBA to revisit the contracting landscape to ensure women have optimal access to the federal supply chain. Another important tool for federal agencies is the sole source authority. I'm encouraging Congress to give federal agencies this tool to level the playing field so women-owned businesses can do what they want to do in this regard. I know small firms, including women-owned businesses, can do more than just supply the federal government. They're ready to be suppliers to large corporations and international markets. Small businesses that secure corporate contracts increase their revenue by an average of 250% and increase their hiring by an average of 150%. Imagine that. We know that large companies utilizing just-in-time inventory replenishment often struggle to identify a wider array of capable and nimble small suppliers. The American Supplier Initiative links small businesses with the private sector and supply chain opportunities. I'm going to work to bring more CEOs into the SBA family and to secure commitments from them to make purchases through small business suppliers, thereby increasing the demand for the corporation's products and establishing a symbiotic relationship. We will also expand this private sector initiative to international commerce to help our firms compete globally. The SBA will adapt to signals in the domestic and the global markets. We will serve as a market maker by opening up new areas of business opportunity for small companies. The SBA has learned from 30 roundtables already and hearings where we collected small business feedback for use in trade negotiations with Europe and Asia. Late last year, the SBA shattered our record for export finance, supporting $2.8 billion in export sales. I believe we can do even more to help our firms reach the 95% of global consumers who reside outside of our borders. We'll continue to support the President's robust agenda, including the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We'll ensure small businesses have the financing they need to engage internationally. As you might expect, the banker in me inquires, as you may be doing the same, as to the stimulative effect our programs are having and their ROI, their return on investment. The ROI on our loan programs is exceptional. Keep in mind, we allow lenders to make loans they otherwise would not have. We fill market gaps. Our loans go to entrepreneurs who don't quite meet conventional underwriting standards. The SBA has $100 billion of portfolio that's highly stimulative. Every dollar we inject into the economy is capital that otherwise would stay on the sidelines. Moreover, every program I've outlined today is fully paid for with our existing appropriation from Congress. I know these are tough, difficult budget times. We will measure our success by tracking the revenue gains and the job gains that result from these initiatives. Programs that don't deliver on these metrics have to be reformed or eliminated. Our largest lending program, the 7A, for example, has been operating at zero subsidy for 2 years. These loans are not costing the American taxpayer not even a dime. We know small businesses must do more with less. The SBA must lead by example. An adaptive SBA must be modern, inclusive, and market sensitive, all the while delivering a strong return on investment to the taxpayer. The initiatives I announced today are not the end of our conversation. but they're a good start. We must adapt to smart technologies. We must be responsive to changing cultures, new lifestyles, and evolving demographics and psychographics. Finally, we must continue to anticipate and seize what portends for tomorrow's markets. The SBA will be modern, inclusive, and be a market maker for small business. My arrival to this country brought me untold opportunities. My gratitude is matched only by my motivation to open more opportunities for every entrepreneur, every American who shares in the entrepreneurial spirit. I never imagined, can you think about that? I never imagined that I would be here today. But now that I am the head of the Small Business Administration, I'm dedicating myself to making small business, every small business, a big business. The hallmark of my work will be to foster entrepreneurial equality, preserving our nation's preeminent role as the world's leading economy. Our entrepreneurs are the risk takers, and their work is lifting our nation. Let's make small business a big deal. The SBA's work has never been more vital. The SBA, it now stands for smart, bold, and accessible in every corner of our nation. God bless you. God bless the United States of America.
To the administrator for laying out a really powerful platform, and I'd like to welcome our panelists up to join me. So as I mentioned, I'm the Director of Competitiveness and Economic Growth here at CAP, and when we think about what makes us competitive as a nation, our ability to come up with new products, with new services, with new ways of doing things is absolutely the lifeblood of our economy. And so it's hard to think of a more timely and important topic than how we foster entrepreneurship, both for new entrepreneurs and also for existing small business owners, particularly those who the administrator mentioned who aspire to be big business owners. So I'd like to first briefly introduce our panelists. They have vast experience, each of them, so please feel free to check out their bio and work on the website. Next to me, I have Nish Acharya. He's a senior advisor at Northeastern University on innovation and entrepreneurship. Fittingly enough, he went to Northeastern from the Obama administration, where he is the director of innovation and entrepreneurship. So Nish will have a really interesting perspective, both from the private sector and the public sector, and I'm delighted to say he's a colleague of mine since he's a senior fellow here at CAP. Next to him, we have Ron Busby, who's the president of the U.S. Black Chamber, and it's an association of more than 100 self-sustaining chambers and business members around the country. So it'll be really interesting to hear what his membership has to say. Ron is also a very successful small businessman himself. The administrator talked about what a huge proportion of our small businesses start with small loans and small revenue pools. Well, Ron grew a business from $150,000 in revenue to over $22 million. So I'm sure we have a lot to learn from him today. And then Monica Mantilla, also a very successful small businesswoman. We're delighted to have her here today. She's the president and CEO of Altura Capital, and she is also a partner at the Small Business Community Capital, and that's an SBIC impact fund. And so it'll be great to hear her perspective on access to capital issues and also how the SBA is working now and can do more in underserved communities. So I want to thank them all for being here. We'll have a conversation amongst the panelists and then open it for questions. And where I wanted to start is with just a little bit of scene setting. So it's 2014. We are now almost 5 years on officially from the end of the Great Recession, although I know to many Americans and communities, it doesn't necessarily feel that way. While we've had 50 months of private sector job growth, we still know that we have too many Americans who are unemployed and underemployed. And so I'd like to start first with perceptions from around the panel. And Ron, maybe we can start with you since you have members around the country. Can you just give us a snapshot here in 2014 of what it's like on the ground for your members?
Great question. I want to thank the audience for being here and thank American Progress for allowing me to be here. Again, I speak on behalf of 114 chambers, black chambers, and 240,000 African American businesses across the country. And what we're hearing across the field is that although we talk a lot about leveling the playing field, it's even more difficult now for African American businesses to get to a level playing field, even a playing field. If you look at the number of African American owned businesses of 1.9 million firms, of that 1.9 million firms, 1.8 have no employees. So we're not talking about mom and pops, we're literally talking about mom or pops, very small businesses. She mentioned the number of $150,000. The average African American owned business is doing less than $150,000 in annualized revenue and actually keeping less than $23,000 in profit. So these firms are not just firms, but they're just basically jobs for these individuals. So you have a lot of folks that left middle-level income jobs and now are employers or making payroll for themselves. She also mentioned women. Of the 1.9 million businesses that we have, 1.1 million of those are women-owned firms. So in our community, now you have many single mothers raising families, now also having the responsibility of being the breadwinner, as well as entrepreneurs. And so it has been very difficult for African American businesses. Access to capital, contracting, and entrepreneurial trainings are very important to our members, and I think the SBA can definitely help us out in all three of those areas.
Absolutely, and we'll be talking about each of those. Monica, what's your perspective looking at 2014? Can you give us a snapshot of, do you think we've come very far from where we were 5 years ago? Where do we still have to go farther?
Well, first of all, just absolutely delighted to be here and hearing the speech of the Administrator Contreras. It just brings me a tremendous amount of hope that not only she's going to rally the resources of the SBA, but she's also going to rally America, rally corporations, rally banks to be able to do the things that need to happen so that we can harness the potential of the small business community. My sense is that today there's sort of a mixed set of conditions. On the one side, and when I think about women-owned businesses and I think about Hispanic-owned businesses, there's a tremendous amount of progress happening today. There's a thriving community that is highly entrepreneurial, many of them women businesses that are growing and that are feeling and having this expansion every day. And I feel the last 2 years, like right after recession, have been a burst of growth. But in tandem with that burst of growth, capital is the necessary component for that to happen efficiently. And so we also have studies, for example, coming out of Secretary of the Department of Commerce and Minority Business Development Agency that show that in the Hispanic community, for example, there's $1.1 trillion that are to be harnessed that haven't been harnessed. Our companies, if you think about the 44,000 Hispanic business owners that sell more than $1 million around the country, they in aggregate sell around 260 to $290 billion. But the studies show that at parity of capital, they should be at 1.4 trillion. We should be at 1.4 trillion. The same with job creation. We together employ 1.2 million people. At parity of capital, we could be employing 3 to 4 million more. And so I think that there's a combined effect of coming out of the recession. The numbers in the Hispanic community are just, demographics are helping our growth, and certainly the entrepreneurialism in the community as well. But it is my estimation that now has sort of an architectural gap where what are we going to do with all this growth? How are we going to provide the right capital, whether it's debt, whether it's equity, whether it's mezzanine? And capital is a very complicated issue. And, I've dedicated the last 20 years of my life to that. And it's complicated because it varies what industry you're in, what size of company you're in, what geography you're in. And so I feel that there's a tremendous role for SBA now to think about what those architectural gaps are. And we just heard the administrator where she's tapping, I feel in a very effective way, some of those gaps.
And I think that's an important point too. The administrator talked about entrepreneurial equality. And I think, hearing both you, Monica, and Ron lay out these gaps, it really highlights the prize that we can have, not just for those individuals and the people they will employ, but for the economy overall. CAP put out a long-term growth strategy last summer, and it's called 300 Million Engines of Growth, and it's based on the novel notion that our economy will do better when every person within it has the opportunity to operate at the top of their talent. So we're going to come back in a moment to access to capital, because I think that's a really important issue. But Nish, I wanted to hear your perspective. You were in the administration 2011 to 2013. So, you know, really sort of in that middle period of recovery between where we are now and the dark days we should remember when we were losing 800,000 jobs in 1 month in January 2009. Obviously, a huge hardship for America's small businesses because their customers weren't there, right? So where do you think we are now, 5 years on from that low point?
So I think the administration has put in place a lot of programs to help us transition our economy more broadly and get to a better space. We were talking about this earlier, that we're now in a global economy where we may not have companies that create 3,000 jobs in one place. They may distribute it across the country. We may require 30 companies that create 100 jobs. And that means the role of the entrepreneur and the small business person becomes more and more important. And I think one of the strategies we worked on in the administration with a diverse group of agencies, from Treasury and CDFIs to Commerce and the Economic Development Administration to NIST and new technologies coming out of there, to SBA and the work they did with accelerators and with the SBIC program and RFP Easy, was to say, let's look coherently across the administration at all of our tools. Let's think about the economic development of the United States as being driven by small business and entrepreneurs. And let's think about how we essentially address two of the things that the administrator touched upon. One was access to capital, and looking more broadly that with the advent of big data, we have a lot more ways of assessing somebody's credibility. It's no longer just algorithms based on data sets that were available 20 years ago, but it's based on a whole lot more that we know now about how they live their life, where they've worked, what they've done, and particularly for communities that don't have as long a history of having small businesses or small business loans, immigrant communities, minority communities, urban communities. These new data sets mean that maybe they can participate more. And so I think a lot of what the administrator and her predecessor did are around that idea of using the tools we have in society to make credit available. The other thing I'll mention, which we worked on, which I think is important now, is that the challenges that entrepreneurs and small business people face are actually the same, whether you're talking about the kid sitting in the Starbucks with his or her laptop, or the immigrant entrepreneur opening a storefront, in that they're still struggling with the learning challenges of building their product or their service, getting the marketing right, getting that first customer, accessing credit, accessing the right board members, advisors, and mentors. So that doesn't really matter whether you're talking about Silicon Valley or where I was yesterday, Lawrence, Massachusetts, one of the poorer cities in America where we've been working on an entrepreneurship program. It's the same set of challenges. And so part of this is to say, let's not unnecessarily differentiate the type of startup or the technology they work on, but let's look at the broad base of skills required. I think the administrator's comments on funding incubators and bringing in more of a, looking at the demographics and supporting entrepreneurship really hit on those issues.
Well, I think it's worth spending a little bit more time in the access to capital space, because we know that that's one of the concerns. And as the administrator said, right now, capital is not reaching all small businesses equitably. And so I wonder if someone would like to take that. Ron, I think you've done some work with your chambers at looking at this. I know the administrator says there's been progress in the last year. I'm sure she would also agree that's from a starting point where none of us wanted to be and none of us want to even be close to. We have much farther to go. So can you give us a perspective on what's happening now with access to capital and how you think the new policies the administrator's talking about or other policies might improve that?
I think some of the policies that she laid out are very instrumental, and I think they could definitely change our communities. What we're finding, and I was surprised to hear that she said that the numbers had increased over the last year. There was an article that was written in the Wall Street Journal about 11 weeks ago that said that the SBA loan guaranteed to the African American community had dropped from 8.65% 2 years ago to 1.7% last year. And that hits home. Those are real numbers. Those are real dollars not reaching our community. That article also addressed the fact that the average size loan that was made by the SBA was about $454,000. If you look at the number of African American owned businesses and where their annualized revenue is, that even is not as large as most of our firms. Most of our firms aren't going to be looking at those $450,000 loans. We're really looking at the micro loans, those that are under $150,000. So I was pleased to hear that they're looking at that, because I think that will definitely change our communities. If you look at our communities, the number one issue that we have is the wealth gap. The average white American family has about $115,000, $116,000 of wealth. The average black family has about $5,500 of wealth. So when we stub our toe, we could be out of business, we could be out of our homes, we could be homeless. That leaves you about 3.5 months worth of income or wealth, as opposed to the average white family that could survive about 4.5 years. So when the recession hit, it hit us very hard. And so any type of program that will get to small business can impact us. The second issue that we really have is unemployment. There's about 1.9 million unemployed African Americans. If we can just allow the small businesses that we have to have the resources, the capital that they need to expand and grow, simple math says there's 1.9 million African American owned businesses and 1.9 million unemployed African Americans. If I could grow those small businesses to be able to have one more employee, I could eliminate unemployment. So the programs that she's discussed, if in fact they get to our communities and they get to the small businesses, will have a huge impact on our communities.
And I know the administrator talked about thinking about what it means to define creditworthiness, and obviously the SBA has a clear role there in setting a standard. I mean, do you think there's been a problem in the past with the definition, with how we look at applicants and say one person and business plan is worthy and another person and business plan is not? Does anyone have any perspective on that?
Well, I would say absolutely yes, because the world has been changing. And so 30, 40 years ago, our parents or our grandparents, if they would have been here, mine were in Colombia, they would have gone to a bank, right, to ask for a loan. And that was, you would go to a bank to get capital. The world of today, the world has become so complex that banks can only lend in a very tight box. And the reality is that frequently small businesses are out of that box. And so that is why we are in presence of all sorts of alternative sources of lending and all sorts of initiatives in capital, from crowdfunding to small business investment companies and all sorts of alternatives that, I'll tell you, in our fund, where we invested in Fund 1 $50 million in 120 companies, 95% of our investments were rejected by a bank. And it's not that they were bad companies, it's just that banks have a very solid and regulatory burden that they cannot step out of. So it is imperative to address the architectural gap that that market is bringing us. And so the question is, if these companies are viable, even if they are not credit worthy by a bank, but they truly are, you know, high potential, capable of growing, capable of employing, being self-sustainable, what sources of capital is the market going to create to be able to harness it? I think Ron's point about, you know, addressing the market needs, right? Tapping into where is the need and how do we develop a model to address that need? I would say in the Hispanic business community, one of the areas that we feel is highly overlooked and untapped is the checks of $1 million to $10 million that companies need. They're already selling $5, $10 million. They're growing. They're maybe working with 1 or 2 corporations. And all of a sudden they get this big order and they need $2, $3 million. Who's going to provide that? A bank will go and say, oh, you know, you don't have enough collateral. You don't have enough history. And so there's where programs of the SBA, like the SBIC fund, like the SBIC program, and very especially SBIC impact program, where there's a commitment of funds like ours where 50% of our investments will go into low and moderate income communities. That is addressing market gaps. And I think that I love the focus and the vision of the administrator, that she's actually figuring out where those gaps are, whether it's the up to 350,000 where she's put a program together. And I think that the next step, as she mentioned it, is SBIC funds and SBIC impact funds to do the bigger checks that are also not being financed by the, you know, regular sources of capital available today. Right. We're on the right direction, is my sense.
I would say, to agree with Monica, I think the definition was set a long time ago using algorithms that were developed decades ago. We just have a lot more information now. The tool that the administrator mentioned to do more of a holistic credit scoring, which looks at a lot of factors, and making that available to banks, I think that could actually have enormous impact. One of the challenges for banks is actually the cost of of doing credit checks for people at lower amounts. And so if you're asking for $100,000 or million, actually for $1 million or more, it's a little bit cheaper. Their setup, their cost structure allows for it. But to give a small loan, it's very expensive for them, and so they don't like to do it. And so if she makes a tool available that actually does the work for them and keeps their costs low, they're probably more likely to be interested in it. The other thing that's changed is just the speed of technology and the ability of financial services industry to keep up with that. I'll give you an example. There's some of you have probably been to sessions about 3D printing and these low-cost printers that can print out iPhone covers or something of that nature. Well, that's actually not a high-tech tool as it gets developed. It'll be something that anybody can buy for $2,000 and then get some training. So you're talking about a couple of $1,000s to get started on that. That sort of technology is so new, but the cost has come down so fast, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are thinking, I may want to buy one and build a business around it. And the financial services industry doesn't quite know what that means yet. There's no model to follow, no projections, no opportunity they can say, okay, I get it. Here in Washington, we're talking about that being the future of manufacturing, and at a branch, where we all live, they're saying, well, I don't know what this is going to mean. How many iPhone covers can you actually print? How are you going to pay back this loan? And so those are real tensions with what we know and where technology is going.
Right, right. And as we think about access to capital, particularly for traditionally underserved communities, I'm curious if any of you have a perspective about new Americans, about immigrant communities. Both Neera and the administrator talked about how important immigrants are to entrepreneurship. As Neera said, 1 in 10 private sector workers in the United States employed by an immigrant. 40% of the Fortune 500 countries in America were started either by an immigrant or an immigrant's child. To declare a personal interest here, all of my grandparents were native Norwegian speakers, and they grew up in a small immigrant community in northern Minnesota, and the first generation to go to school. My grandfather had the typical new American story: 5 kids, 4 businesses, 4 jobs. 2 of them were businesses he started, very small businesses in their community, and then other businesses just to pay the bills along the way. How do you think we are doing right now in terms of integrating new Americans into the entrepreneurial culture, whether that's access to capital issues, whether it's counseling issues that the administrator talked on, and what else do you think we need to be doing?
Well, I'll start with one example. So as I mentioned, I was in Lawrence, Massachusetts yesterday working with the entrepreneurship program there, and they've done a couple of simple things. They realized that they were not reaching out to a large portion of the community there, 80% of which is Hispanic, so they started doing the business plan contests in Spanish, which was the first time anywhere in the United States that they'd heard of the whole process being done in Spanish, and they'd replicated that with the Vietnamese community and others. And so I think it's just thinking out of the box and saying we understand that there's a lot of good content out there to train entrepreneurs in English and to train them if they're from upper middle class backgrounds or if they went to college. And then if you also believe that the process they go through of getting customers and building their capacity is the same, you're essentially saying, how do we look at all this great content out there? How do we adjust it for the community we're working with, whatever their background is, and provide that? So I think we do a decent job with some parts of the immigrant community, those that are educated, those that are connected, and then we haven't adjusted all of our great tools for those who are not necessarily connected in the ecosystem.
Speaking of adjusting tools, we've also talked a little bit about women entrepreneurs, the increasing role they're playing. I would still say a hugely under-tapped resource. Ron, Monica, you both touched on that. If we think about existing tools we have and how we have to adapt them, or new tools we might need, if you think about the cost of childcare crisis in this country. It's a family crisis. It's also absolutely, there's no doubt in my mind, is affecting entrepreneurship of women. So if you think about it through the lens of what's going on with women, either in the community you represent, Ron, through the U.S. Black Chambers, or Monica, different people you've worked with, I'm wondering what you think there.
The things that, if we're talking still about access to capital, I think is a huge challenge, and I was glad to hear the administrator mentioned it, and that is the amount of time that it takes to get a no or a yes when filling out an application. Unfortunately, when you talk about opportunities, you talk about contracts, you're talking about starting a business, typically you don't have a long window to be able to fill the need. And so many times business owners go to a bank, they're saying, I have an opportunity, a contract, a new opportunity, and they have maybe sometimes, 15, 30 days. And many times it takes the bank, weeks to tell you no. And in that time, you're still waiting on, or you're holding on to the fact that, you're going to get the loan, and by the time you do, many times the contract has ended. The second piece of that is many women business owners have had the opportunity to do business with the government. And the government is a great place to start, great place. They're the largest procurator in the country, in the world. But the government is notorious for paying slow. And many times you can get a government contract, you can start July 1st, and you may not get paid until October, November. And for a small business owner, banks don't necessarily want to fund government contracts. And so it leaves an entrepreneur in a very peculiar situation. They're growing, they have a new opportunity, but they can't get funding on it, and so they're forced to do some non-traditional methods, maybe factoring. In many cases in our communities, the family and friends, the family is not necessarily there, and so we're forced to do things that are very expensive. So when she talked about some of the tools that are being laid out for not just women-owned businesses, but for small businesses, I think that will be definitely positively received in our community.
And I would just add to that, the numbers today continue to show us that women, although, the growth is there, continue to be denied at a higher rate for a loan than the rest of the population. So I think that those challenges of equalizing and leveling the playing field still, are there. On the other hand, I have the honor and pleasure every day of running an investment management firm where we get to work with many women-owned investment management firms. And I can tell you, women invest in a very judicious way and in a very comprehensive way. And because of our nature, because we have our kids so much in mind, our families in mind, our communities in mind, we have a very comprehensive view of the world, and we manage risk in a very judicious way. And so I think that when the best of women characteristics are put to play, it actually creates a fantastic opportunity for having women as investors and women as business owners. It just brings an added value that I believe is going to bring a tremendous amount of progress to our society. Because women still are not there, but I think that we're living a time of tremendous prosperity and flourishing of the way women manage businesses, of the way women invest in businesses. To Ron's point of the necessity for small businesses to be paid on time, I would say that in the world of capital, and recognizing that it's a very complex world, but to begin, pay on time. Corporate America, with all their supplier diversity programs, which are phenomenal and quite commendable, and there's so much more to do there in terms of partnerships. And as I tease my friends in Corporate America, I tell them, okay, we need to go from checkbox to checkbook. But along that way, I think that prompt payment is definitely an added value, because that can mean $2, $5, $10, $15 million in working capital that a company needs, because instead of being paid 30 days, they're paid 120 days or 60 days. I also just want to make a quick comment in terms of the national approach versus the regional approach. I've been, 20 plus years in this process of having a national approach, and I've come to the conclusion that many of these things are very much cluster oriented. So you can, for example, think about the dynamics in New York City, in New York State, with women-owned firms of a certain industry. So following clusters and following dynamics, and then figuring out where their needs are and trying to create multi-stakeholder initiatives to address them, combining public sector, private sector, and nonprofits, I think is a very efficient way to address issues that will be, ultimately job creators, economic developers, and ways for these companies to grow and prosper. So I think that the regional conversation is a very valid one. And it's very, refreshing to see, for example, a city comptroller of the city of New York who's laid out a very strong agenda when it comes to diversity and he's going to have a conversation with corporate America about the importance of having good diversity inside their entities and also the way they do business. So I think that the conversation is a very vibrant one today in the country, and I love the fact I see that our leaders get it. And so I think that we're living, you know, a very positive time where it's just a matter of sort of rolling our sleeves and getting a lot of things done together.
Well, just, Monica, hearing you talk about different regional approaches, Nisha, I know this is something you've looked at, and one of the things that we try and do here is highlight good examples, and by all means, let's copy them. So you mentioned, in particular, with immigrant communities, some
right.
interesting ways to sort of tap into their entrepreneurial spirit, just with something as common sense as making sure they can compete in a way that's more familiar to them. So are there other models that you've seen, as Monica said, different regional dynamics of people you think, whether it's cities or states, that we
right.
should be looking to?
So the other model I've always been fascinated to watch because of their success, but the implications has been in New Orleans, actually, where there's been a very interesting, you know, dynamic. There's actually 500 privately funded startup companies in New Orleans, and there was also at the same time, you know, all the reform in the education space, where there's lots of education entrepreneurs starting charter schools, and a lot of public health entrepreneurs who came in after Katrina, and we're looking at public health indicators in the city. And I think one of the key things you see in the, you know, California and the Northeast, elsewhere, is a vibrancy of entrepreneurship that's not just business driven. It's very much a culture of rolling up your sleeves and working on whatever the problem might be. And one approach may be for-profit, one approach may be nonprofit. And so in New Orleans, they have 500. They have the 500 startups. They have a whole bunch of nonprofits that have started up as well. And then in the last couple of years, they actually have connected with projects to economic development groups working in different parts of the city. And again, they saw that the same issues were there, that as they were trying to revitalize business in the 9th Ward, which got hit the most by Katrina, that it was the same process that the business people were going through around, how do I get a customer? How do I present myself to an investor? How do I make my product or my service better? And so now when they do their entrepreneurship week, it's no longer one group. It's actually about 20 groups that really are across the board in terms of who their audience is, in terms of teaching business skills. The SBA is there, other economic development agencies are there, because they sort of focused on the skills required to build your business from one employee to two, to get one customer, and said we don't really care if you're the tech startup or what have you. And to bring it back to the 3D printing, they also said, you know, this is a big opportunity. A lot of the materials for that are out of the oil and gas industry. Louisiana, obviously, big oil and gas industry. And so, again, they got people across the city together and said, if we bought, you know, 20 of these printers and set up stations in different parts of the city, could different entrepreneurs come in and use them? And maybe some are from, you know, educated students from Tulane. Maybe some are recent immigrants who are there post-Katrina. It didn't really matter. It was how do we utilize the new technology to create jobs and opportunities. So,
absolutely. Well, to take the conversation a little bit broader, to talk about sort of the economic environment we're in overall, one of the work that the economics team here at CAP has been really involved with is talking about middle-out economics. The notion that if we want a strong and growing economy, we need a strong and growing middle class. So when we talk about our concern about the middle class, we're not just talking about the middle 3 quintiles of people. We're talking about getting as many Americans as possible up to a higher standard of living, and giving them the opportunities, back to this entrepreneurial equality, to use the top of their talents. And I know the administrator touched on older Americans, and that's certainly important, particularly when we consider that half of all Americans who retired last year didn't want to retire. Right? They left the workforce for some other reason. There wasn't a job there for them. There wasn't a good match for their skills. They weren't in good enough health. These types of reasons. I also have a lot of concerns about younger Americans and what's happening there in terms of entrepreneurship. Pew just put out some research that said 59% of Americans now say the American dream is out of reach. 63% of young people said that. So you think about all the optimism and verve you like to imagine amongst people in their 20s, for example, and the majority of them say that most Americans can't do it. We know people are waiting longer to start households, certainly waiting longer to buy houses because of what's going on with the credit crunch still in housing. We know that people are waiting longer to start their business. So just if we think about, again, from this middle class frame, again, that we all have an interest in rectifying the terrifying statistic that there are now more unemployed and underemployed young Americans than people in New York City. And entrepreneurship is a key part of a way to get into the middle class. I'm curious both what you're seeing membership-wise or just in people you interact with, Monica and Nish, in terms of young people in entrepreneurship. Why are people waiting? Why do you think people are more concerned, young people, that the American dream might not be attainable for them? And then, most importantly, because we're a policy shop, what do we do about it?
So if you look at the one field, the one industry that has really boomed over the last 10 or 20 years, it's really been the high-tech industry. And a lot of young people are really engaged with technology. But if you look at the opportunities to not only be employed in the high-tech industry, but also to do business with the high-tech industry, there's a huge disconnect. There was an article that just came out about Google, and we can use them as an example. Of their workforce, there's only 1.7% of those that are African Americans. And that's what we know. We don't know about the firms that are under Google, and we also don't know about the entrepreneurial opportunities there. If I'm a young person, I'm saying, you know, I enjoy technology and I want to go work in the tech industry, and I hear about that, I think there are things that the SBA, this administration can definitely do, not only to improve the hiring practices within technology firms, but the contract opportunities for minorities that eventually will hire some of those young folk to ensure that they have the opportunities. We have to hold our biggest and best firms accountable to ensure that these new Americans, young Americans, have the American dream, because it is still there. We just have to change some of our philosophies in corporate America as well as the government agencies.
And when you talk, Ron, about what we can do as a government, tools we can use, are you thinking in part there again about this procurement angle, the government as purchaser and standards that are set there?
We're a business organization, so we try to use most of our policy, most of our energy trying to create business opportunities. And we feel like if we can create business opportunities, then in fact we'll change our communities because of hiring practices, because of home ownership. We can discuss the wealth gap, but it all starts with that first opportunity that a small business or an emerging business has. And I think the second thing is we have to provide access to capital for firms to be able to acquire other firms. The majority of minority firms are very small, and most of the opportunities that are out there, they say we're not large enough, we don't have the size or the scale. So we have to put in place opportunities, avenues, resources for firms to partner together, do joint ventures, consortiums, and just outright acquire each other. That's how I grew my firm. I think it will give us a leg up, because growing organically in today's market is very difficult. I think corporate America as well as government agencies have to do a lot more with a lot less. And so it's a lot easier for them to do business with large majority firms that have all the resources and skills already built in. It's very difficult and time-consuming many times to take a risk on a small business, but we know that's where most of the new jobs are being created as well as the new opportunities.
And Nish, so you're at a university now.
Right.
Are you surprised by, do you agree with this perception that there's some dissatisfaction amongst millennials, or again, some of it's just data. We know in terms of home purchasing, starting new homes, that's behind. I mean, do you see this problem in the Northeast?
Yeah, so you see, it's a fascinating thing. Across colleges, across America, entrepreneurship is booming, and everybody wants to save the world and be an entrepreneur. And there's two drivers of that. One is youthful optimism that they can do anything. The other is, frankly, deep pessimism that they'll get good jobs in existing companies, or that what they'll get is, frankly, really boring compared to doing some sort of a startup activity. And so they're looking at the professional economy and saying, that's pretty boring, they're not going to pay me well, I don't know what I'm going to learn, I'm going to try to create my own job. That tends to work well only with those who have a good safety net in terms of family and education all behind them, where they can, okay, I didn't work out, I'll go do something, get back on track. I think the The more interesting problem we have beyond millennials is sort of as they get a little older. We know from a lot of research that the best entrepreneurs are age 35 to 50, and that's because they've had work experience, they have connections, they understand what the business problem is that they're trying to solve. But that's also the age when you usually have a mortgage and you have kids and you have responsibilities. And so I think a couple of things the administration did and a couple of things CAP talked about in that 300 million report are important in terms of the portability of benefits, the ability to access retirement funds for reducing the cost of administrative programs within your business. The portability of healthcare now with ACA, that was one of the biggest drivers preventing people from becoming entrepreneurs was actually losing that healthcare, particularly if you're 35 and you have a family and responsibilities. And so I think portability of benefits, the Department of Education now is starting to promote the fact that you can defer your student loans if you want to start a business, which was actually always there, nobody realized it. And so just making folks aware that you can, the things you thought were preventing you from starting a business, there are ways to now address it. And I think we have to continue with that as we go along from a policy perspective. Say, what are the barriers to starting a business? What are the barriers to hiring? And are those, are there ways to take away those barriers without sort of being blind to the impact on, either the public sector's budget or to, what the point of those things were. So unemployment insurance is very important. Businesses often complain that it's a cost, but as a society we value it. So maybe you look at it one way, but maybe there's other things like the administrator said around the cost of getting a loan, the cost of the time to be compliance that you can actually address and deal with. And so I think looking at it and saying, what are the barriers to these people who may be successful entrepreneurs, and how do we reduce those systematically from a policy perspective, that would be very useful.
Your question, Jennifer, I would say creating businesses has always been a risky business, right? The chances of not being successful are always there. It's a chance, right? It's a risk that people that have the drive of a certain product, a certain service go out and they believe in it, but they may fail, right? And that's always been that way. That's how capitalism works. And it's the best and brightest who get to be, you also need a system that enables them. And it has, your numbers are exactly right. The middle class squeeze has been there. And there's no doubt the numbers tell us that story. But I think that in the midst of both of those challenges, the fact that doing small business, creating small businesses is a risky business, and the fact that the middle class has been shrinking and being going through not through expansion, right, but actually through shrinking. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity today for all of us as multiple stakeholders, because it certainly is not only a role of government to create the conditions. It's not the role of corporate America or the private sector only. I think that there's 4 key actors here where you need to have the capital sources, right? You need to have the public sector and the private sector and the nonprofit sector working together to generate the type of conditions that we need. And we were just at Altura finishing a paper where we talk about the roadmap of capital, because we recognize it's a very complex area, and we offer 11 points in that roadmap, and we divide them into capital sources, capital enablers, and conveners, and calls to action. Because you sort of need a lot of, and in terms of call to action, to give you an example, Ron and I can sit with dozens of heads of supplier diversity around corporate America who would love to do more, but don't have the framework to do more. So what does that tell Ron and I, or Javier Palomares, the counterpart of Ron at the USHCC, who does such a phenomenal job building relationships with corporate America. But we've learned something. We need to talk to board members. We need to talk to CEOs, because they are the ones who need to change certain structures and enable their supplier diversity people so they can go from a checkbox to a checkbook. And so those types of dialogues, I think that are the type of calls to action that need to happen. The capital sources are there. This world is a world full of capital. You think about the CRA program, the CRA funds that exist through the banks, and how they can be channeled to small businesses. how the capital that endowments and foundations could use through their impact and SRI investing, pension funds that can also incorporate into their strategy small businesses. So the capital is there that can be channeled, but you need to change the minds of the people who say, hey, you know, there's something here positive for the country, that we're going to make a lot of money, we're going to change the world, let's get into action and let's make it happen.
Right, right, and for them as business people too, so that's a great point.
Right.
We'd like to open it up now to questions from the audience. I would ask that when you get the microphone, if you could please say your name and where you're from, that would be great.
Thank you. Joan Michelson, Green Connections. One of the areas that I haven't heard you talk about, and forgive me, I was late, didn't hear the administrator, maybe she brought it up, is clean tech and energy and sustainability, which addresses the unknowns, Raj, that you were talking about. There are some innovative programs now for that, but women and minorities do not ask for the money. I just did a program with the Department of Energy. Only 6%, that's single digits, of women, of the applicants are women. That's not asking for the money, and that's a 30-year number. That's not like recession number. We tripled it, thank you very much, but that's a blip, okay? How do we get women and minorities to ask for the money and to look for these alternative sources and to stop canceling themselves out and saying, oh, well, they'll never fund me because X, and to learn how to address these unknowns with these funding operations so that they can educate them about the market for 3D printing or the market for a new hydrogen fuel cell, et cetera.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, you know, Ron, I know you talked about high tech being a growing sector. We absolutely know that clean tech is and will continue to be as well. Does anyone on the panel want to take that?
I mean, I know when we were at, when I was at Commerce, we had a grant challenge around economic development driven by clean technology. And there was a lot of interest around the country. I think one of the challenges that came up was it still relates to the gap at the educational level, which is closing around the number of engineers we have from different backgrounds. And so we tend to fund, the investment community tends to fund those people they know, and that tends to be classmates, that tends to be business colleagues. And so the lack of diversity we've had in the STEM pipelines is currently definitely showing itself in terms of what we fund. As that gap closes, I hope to be optimistic that some of these numbers will change, but that's going to take a long time. Beyond that, we didn't look at why we were missing certain groups of entrepreneurs in terms of applying and why we weren't. But some of the feedback was that it was around just the general challenge we have right now in the STEM pipeline.
I think it's just exposure. As has been stated, there's funds out there. It's knowing where to go, knowing how to go after it, what to ask for, and when we connect the dots, we truly are successful. But it is really just exposure and opportunity. And when we know better, we typically do better. I think that goes for both the women community as well as the minority community. It has been a challenge for us to find out all the resources that are available. I think that the SBA historically has not done a great job at really explaining who they are and what they do. I think over the last couple of years they've done a much better job, but I think as stakeholders, as really resource centers, as information is available, we make it available to our members and our businesses. I definitely have found that our members take advantage of those.
My thoughts are hopefully 10 or 20 years away from now, those market gaps will be addressed, because when opportunities are there and talent is prepared and there's an efficiency in the marketplace, supply and demand meet and things get to happen. I think that what we're experiencing now is that we still don't have the market efficiency. And I love what the administrator mentioned today about listening to the market and responding to that market, because we don't have the market efficiency in our segments. You think about the African American community or the Asian American community or the women-owned community or the Hispanic community, we're still in markets that are experiencing tremendous growth, but we still don't have an efficient market where we have the right capital available at the right time with the right degree of preparation. But we're in that evolution. I think that one of the things that we haven't touched, and you reminded me of that, is the deep necessity to prepare our next generation, our kids, the talent that is today graduating from college, from MBAs, because, and there's wonderful organizations, like, for example, the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, who has a STEM program and is going in, dozens of universities around the country and cultivating those leaders of tomorrow and touching every one of them and saying, hey, you know what? There's all these opportunities out there. But it's a system. They need more role models. They need to have the market intelligence. Cycles are sometimes so long that, I see in the investment management world people that are capable and have a track record and can manage a portfolio and build an infrastructure. They're 2 years in business, they can't get assets, and they have to fold. And so it's a complex issue that requires market preparedness, talent available, and capital. Without capital, entrepreneurs can't have wings. Capital is the key element.
And just while we go to the next question, I would just say too, I'm glad you raised the point. CAP is actually cross-disciplinary, so it's something I'll raise with our energy team as well. And I think you start with measuring these things, right? And then you can at least see where you have gaps in the architecture, as you talk about it, Monica, and what we can do about them. You want to take another question from the audience?
Thank you. My name is Gladys. Hi, Monica. Good to see you. I represent one of the largest financial institutions, blue logo in New York City. I am the supplier diversity manager for the organization. And I have 2 questions and 1 comment. First, I'd like to, Nish, I want to thank you because I read a lot of some of your write-ups, a lot of the articles, and you focus a lot of innovation. And one of the documents that I read not too long ago, I use it over and over and over, which is to really build the business case around why do business with diverse vendors, because they bring a lot of the innovation that we had not had that background of being from different cultures, won't have all that innovation piece to the table. So I want to thank you because you helped me a lot. And second, Ron, I think if you've been following the Dodd-Frank, do you believe that is actually helping us in our profession to push the needle, push corporate America to do more? Just wanted to hear your perspective. And Monica, your point about helping us help the small business minority community get access to corporate America. You said that you need or access more to CPOs and board members to really get them on the same page. What is it that we can do in my level to give or for that access? Because I completely agree. They need to be aware and embrace more and do more. So how can we help?
So if I can ask Monica and Ron that you each answer briefly, just so we can get in one more question before we end. Monica, do you want to take them in reverse order?
Sure. So thank you, Gladys, and thank you for being here, one of our wonderful heads of supplier diversity in corporate America. I would say the board conversation needs to be convened by government. No one better than Administrator Contreras, Undersecretary Miller, and National MBDA Director Alejandra Castillo, and Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker, inviting corporate America and their CEOs and their board members to come and have a conversation about how America can win if we harness the power of small businesses and minority businesses. I think that what would be fantastic is that conversation, Treasury departments are convened and heads of supplier diversity are convened. Because I would say that once you receive a call from your CEO and say, and you get the message, hey, I need to do something about this issue. What do I do? The people that have the knowledge and understand the challenges are the heads of supplier diversity. But now you're going to be empowered and given a broader mandate because there is a conversation happening at the board or at the CEO level. That's my thought about that.
I totally agree. But I also think it goes upward as well. I think if you say, I'd like to do more, many times CEOs are looking for input from their staff. They've given you, and many times, the power and the autonomy to do that, but you need our help. And sometimes it has to be an internal, external game to be successful. In reference to Dodd-Frank's, yes, I know I'm being taped. It has had an impact. Has it reached our communities? I would have to say we've had some challenges. It had a great impetus and desire to be able to get the dollars back to the small local businesses, but we have not seen the impact that it was initiated to derive when it was first developed.
And I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and give my 2 cents on this as well. I think that, you know, we're now 3 years on from the passage of Dodd-Frank. All the regulations haven't still been written, and so I think there should absolutely be haste in getting that done and getting it done right. And we need to remember that when it comes to regulation, it's not a one and done, right? We need to constantly be evaluating what's working, what's not working, what's actually happening on the grounds in communities. I will say this from my perspective on Dodd-Frank, the single most important thing I think we need to do to protect and grow America's middle class, whether that's entrepreneurs or the rest of us, is not go through another wrecking financial crisis. So I am unapologetically on the side of getting regulation right, which isn't about more or less, right? It's about figuring out how we can make sure we have the right regulations for the job. But Ron and I were talking about this earlier. If you think about depending on which estimates you choose, between 13 and 16 trillion lost in household wealth, a lot of it's come back from the Great Recession, but it didn't go back to the same people, right? And so, you know, we can look at, in particular, gains that were made in communities of color throughout the 90s were virtually wiped out by the Great Recession. And so I think it's a great question, and I think it's important that that's one of those things that we keep revisiting as we go on. We can take one more question.
Hi, I'm Mr. Lloyd Solis, University of Maryland. Nowadays, we have so many college graduates and even graduate students who have no jobs. Either they are unemployed or underemployed or returning back to their parents' home because they cannot find a job. So as people with entrepreneurial spirit, what suggestion could you give to our college students who would choose not to get unemployment but to enter into entrepreneurship or start a business or what, instead of getting a regular employment, which is, you know, in the box style, whereas business is you are free, you have no employer, you are the master of your time, you have no time in, time out. And would you suggest that to our college students who don't have employment right now? Thank you.
Great. Well, just on that, I think we can, because I'm the child of a military officer, so I'll be sure we end on time. We'll give it to Nish to have the last word, and I will also give a shout out, since Gladys was thoughtful enough to mention Nish's work. You can read about what he's thinking about on Forbes. He writes regularly on innovation and entrepreneurship. So Nish, since you work so much, and economic development, since you work so much actually on this issue of young people and college students, what would be your answer to that question?
So I think anybody who's started a business knows that it's really harder than anything else you can do. And that master of your own schedule also means there's nobody to help you and nobody to answer your phone calls or anything like that. So for young people, I think the opportunity for entrepreneurship is that they are at the forefront of a lot of new technologies and they understand it better than the rest of us. And so if they can find a way to capitalize on it, they can do very well for themselves, do very well for society. However, being 21 and not having any experience, any connections, anything is very, very difficult to be successful. So most successful entrepreneurs usually say, go get a job first, understand how the business world works or the nonprofit world, and then go. Now, if you can't get one, you have a great idea and you're willing to work 180 hours a week, you know, by all means, go for it. But it is a very, very tough slog. Most of the young people do it as a way of getting a lot of experience and because they might have a financial cushion which to lean on until they either take off or they get another job. So.
I would recommend to most of our young folk coming out of high school, college, many times they have a great idea. They come out of school with great skills and resources. They don't really know where to challenge those. I typically tell them, go find a business that's doing exactly what you're wanting to do, and go volunteer your time. The resources and skills that you bring can typically double, triple those small businesses, and you can earn yourself a job. Or you can get into a field where you may be able to buy the firm, so you don't have some of those same challenges. 19, 20 years old, you start a business, 90% of firms are going to fail within the first couple of years. Now you're going to mess up your credit, your name, the company's potential. I would say go and work for a small business, even if it's a volunteer role. Many individuals have the opportunity to come to Washington, D.C. and do internships. Find a small business that could perhaps provide an internship, if it's paid or unpaid, and go work there. Learn many of the skills that you need, and if you want to go out and be an entrepreneur on your own, I think that's a great place to start.
And so that's interesting, since both of you sort of alighted on the, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, go find yourself a job with successful people or people you want to emulate. I know that that is a harder task than it sounds, considering the economic environment we're still in. So I would just say that these are issues that we're all still thinking about at a macro level. I thank you all so much for coming here and giving your time today, and for what you do every day. I thank you all for being a part of the conversation. Thank you.